In the heart of Kentucky's rolling hills, where morning mist dances across emerald pastures and ancient oak trees stand as silent sentinels, Harmony Hills Farm had always been a sanctuary for broken souls. But nothing could have prepared the Morrison family for the miracle they were about to witness on that life-changing September afternoon. This is the story of Emma Chen, an 8-year-old girl whose world had been shattered not once, but twice by unimaginable tragedy. At age 4, a rare genetic condition called Leber congenital amaurosis stole her sight forever, plunging her into a world of permanent darkness. Then, just 2 years later, a devastating car accident on Interstate 75 claimed both her parents' lives, leaving little Emma completely alone in a world she could no longer see. The foster care system had struggled with Emma's case for months. The combination of blindness and severe emotional trauma made her what social workers grimly called difficult to place. Traditional foster families couldn't handle her unique challenges, and specialized facilities were overcrowded with waiting lists stretching for years. That's when Sarah and Tom Morrison stepped forward. This third-generation farming family had built their reputation on taking in the unwanted, the broken, the forgotten. Their 400-acre farm in rural Kentucky had become home to rescued horses, abandoned cattle, and now, they hoped, one very special little girl. When Emma first arrived at our farm, Sarah Morrison recalls, her voice still trembling with emotion months later, she was like a living ghost. She barely spoke above a whisper, rarely smiled, and seemed to carry the unbearable weight of the entire world on those tiny shoulders. For 3 agonizing weeks, Emma existed rather than lived on the farm. She would sit motionless on the wraparound porch for hours, her unseeing brown eyes fixed on sounds she couldn't identify, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through cornfields, the rhythmic creaking of the old wooden fence that surrounded the property. The farm animals seemed to sense her profound sadness. Horses would pause mid-gallop when she walked by, their ears pricked forward in curious concern. The barn cats would sit near her feet, but never quite close enough to touch. Even the usually boisterous chickens would quiet their constant chatter when Emma settled on her favorite spot by the kitchen window. But there was one creature on Harmony Hills Farm that nobody, absolutely nobody, went near voluntarily. One animal so dangerous, so unpredictable, that even seasoned ranch hands approached with extreme caution and backup plans for rapid escape. His name was Thunderbolt, and he was 2,400 pounds of pure, concentrated rage, wrapped in the muscled frame of a Spanish fighting bull. This massive beast had arrived at the farm 6 months earlier from a shuttered illegal fighting operation in Texas, where he'd been bred, trained, and brutalized specifically for combat in underground arenas that catered to wealthy thrill-seekers who bet enormous sums on animal violence. The authorities had rescued Thunderbolt along with 12 other animals from conditions so horrific that several investigators required psychological counseling afterward. While the other animals showed signs of recovery with time and patience, Thunderbolt remained a walking powder keg of trauma and fury. Thunderbolt was damaged in every way an animal can be damaged, Tom Morrison explains, his weathered face creasing with sadness. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, this bull had been systematically destroyed by human cruelty. Every expert we consulted told us the same thing. He was beyond rehabilitation. The massive bull lived in complete isolation in a specially reinforced enclosure built from steel beams and concrete posts that could withstand his frequent explosive charges. For 6 months, he had attacked every human who came within 50 feet of his pen. 3 veterinarians had been injured attempting to provide basic medical care. The local sheriff had actually suggested euthanasia as the safest option for everyone involved. Thunderbolt's daily routine consisted of pacing his enclosure like a caged demon, charging at the reinforced fencing whenever humans appeared, and bellowing with such rage that neighbors 2 miles away would close their windows to muffle the terrifying sound. His massive horns, each nearly 2 feet long and sharp as spears, bore scars from his fighting days. His hide was crisscrossed with old wounds that had healed into raised, angry welts. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Dark, furious pools that held no trust, no peace, only the burned-out rage of a creature that had learned to expect nothing but pain from the world. Looking at Thunderbolt was heartbreaking, Sarah admits. You could see glimpses of what he might have been if he'd been treated with kindness instead of cruelty. But those glimpses were buried so deep under layers of trauma that most people couldn't see past the monster the fighting rings had created. Emma had been living on the farm for exactly 23 days when she first heard Thunderbolt's bellowing. She was sitting on the porch after breakfast, mechanically eating toast while Sarah tended to the kitchen garden when the bull's furious roar echoed across the property like thunder rolling across the hills. Most people found Thunderbolt's vocalizations absolutely terrifying, the sound of pure, unadulterated rage that seemed to shake the ground itself. Visitors to the farm would actually jump when they heard him, and several had cut their visits short rather than endure the unsettling reminder of the dangerous predator living just a few hundred yards away. But Emma tilted her head in a way that Sarah had never seen before, like she was listening to something that no one else could hear. For the first time in weeks, genuine curiosity flickered across her small face. "What's making that sound?" Emma asked quietly. They were the first words she'd spoken in 4 days. What do you think Emma heard in Thunderbolt's rage that no one else could detect? Have you ever noticed how children seem to understand things that adults miss? Share your thoughts in the comments because what happens next will challenge everything you believe about healing, hope, and the mysterious connections that can form between wounded souls. Sarah Morrison hesitated, unsure how to explain Thunderbolt to a child who had already endured more trauma than most adults could survive. How do you tell an 8-year-old girl that the terrifying sounds echoing across their peaceful farm came from a creature so dangerous that grown men refuse to approach his enclosure? "That's just one of our bulls, sweetie," Sarah said carefully, choosing her words with the delicacy of someone defusing a bomb. He's having a very difficult time right now." Emma's response stopped Sarah cold. The little girl turned her unseeing eyes toward the distant sound with an expression of profound understanding that seemed impossible for someone so young. "He's not angry," Emma said with quiet certainty. "He's crying, like me." The parallel hit Sarah like a physical blow. Here were two souls, both orphaned by human cruelty, both carrying wounds that ran deeper than anyone could see, both isolated from the world by trauma that seemed impossible to heal. Could this blind child really understand something about Thunderbolt that veterinarians, animal behaviorists, and experienced ranchers had all missed? Over the next several days, something extraordinary began to happen. Every time Thunderbolt's bellowing echoed across the farm, Emma would stop whatever she was doing and listen with an intensity that bordered on communion. She would sit perfectly still, her head tilted at that distinctive angle, as if she was having a conversation that no one else could hear. "She's listening to something we can't understand," Tom observed, watching Emma from the kitchen window as she positioned herself on the porch whenever Thunderbolt began his daily vocalizations. "It's like she's hearing words in his sounds." Dr. Martinez, the farm's veterinarian, was initially skeptical when the Morrisons described Emma's unusual interest in their most dangerous animal. "Children often romanticize what they don't understand," he cautioned. "Thunderbolt isn't expressing sadness, he's expressing rage and territorial dominance. That bull is a walking weapon, and no amount of wishful thinking will change that." But Emma's behavior suggested something far more complex than childhood fantasy. She began asking specific questions about Thunderbolt's history, his daily routine, even his physical condition. When Sarah mentioned that the bull barely ate, and often went days without lying down to rest, Emma nodded as if this information confirmed something she already suspected. "He doesn't trust sleep," Emma said matter-of-factly. "When bad things happen to you, sleep feels dangerous. I didn't sleep for weeks after Mommy and Daddy died." The insight was so precise, so psychologically accurate, that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Emma wasn't projecting human emotions onto an animal. She was recognizing symptoms of trauma that she understood from her own devastating experience. If this incredible story of two wounded souls recognizing each other is touching your heart, please hit that like button right now to show your support. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, click that subscribe button because we share amazing stories of healing and hope every week. Trust me, what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. Emma's request to meet Thunderbolt began on her 4th week at the farm. At first, Sarah and Tom dismissed the idea as impossible. The liability alone would be catastrophic if something went wrong. But Emma's quiet persistence, combined with her increasingly accurate observations about the bull's behavior, made them reconsider. She described his pacing pattern perfectly without ever seeing it, Tom told Dr. Martinez during one of the vet's visits. She knew he favored his left front hoof, knew he positioned himself in the corner of his enclosure during thunderstorms, knew he barely touched his food during the first 3 days of each week. How could she know these things, Doctor? Martinez had no explanation. Emma's knowledge of Thunderbolt's behavioral patterns was more detailed than his own veterinary observations, and she had never been within 200 yards of the bull's enclosure. The breakthrough came when Emma correctly predicted that Thunderbolt would have a particularly violent episode on a Tuesday morning, something she announced at breakfast the day before. Sure enough, Tuesday dawned with the bull charging his fencing with such fury that the reinforced posts actually cracked under the impact. "How did you know?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside Emma's chair with a mixture of amazement and concern. "He told me yesterday," Emma replied simply. "He was extra sad because he remembered something bad. Sometimes memories hit you like waves, and you can't stop them from crashing over you." The description of trauma response was so clinically accurate that Sarah wondered if Emma had been exposed to psychological terminology during her time in foster care. But when she checked with Emma's social worker, she learned that the girl had been largely nonverbal since her parents' death and had barely engaged with the counselors assigned to her case. Emma's understanding of Thunderbolt's emotional state was coming from somewhere else entirely, a place of shared experience that transcended species barriers. 3 weeks of careful observation convinced the Morrisons that Emma possessed an almost supernatural ability to read Thunderbolt's moods and predict his behavior. She knew when he would be agitated, when he would retreat to the back of his enclosure, even when he would actually eat the food they provided. Finally, against every rational instinct and professional recommendation they had received, Sarah and Tom made a decision that would either result in a miracle or a tragedy. "If we do this," Sarah told her husband, "we do it with every possible safety precaution. Multiple barriers, emergency protocols, and at the first sign of aggression, we stop immediately." The plan they developed was elaborate and careful. They would bring Emma to the outer perimeter of Thunderbolt's enclosure, separated by 2 layers of reinforced fencing and a 20-foot buffer zone. She would never be in actual physical contact with the bull, and multiple adults would be positioned to intervene instantly if anything went wrong. But as they prepared for this unprecedented meeting between a blind child and a traumatized bull, none of them could have predicted what would happen when these 2 wounded souls finally encountered each other face to face. The morning of the meeting arrived gray and overcast, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon like omens of the emotional tempest about to unfold. Emma had been unusually quiet during breakfast, as if she was preparing herself for something momentous. "Are you nervous, sweetie?" Sarah asked as they walked slowly across the farm toward Thunderbolt's distant enclosure. Emma considered the question with the seriousness of someone twice her age. "A little," she admitted, "but he's been waiting for me. I can feel it." What do you think will happen when Emma finally meets Thunderbolt face to face? Can 2 traumatized souls really heal each other? Have you ever experienced a connection that seemed to transcend normal understanding? Share your thoughts, because what happens next will challenge everything you believe about the power of empathy and love. As Sarah led Emma across the dewy pasture toward Thunderbolt's reinforced enclosure, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The storm clouds gathering overhead created an ominous backdrop for what was about to unfold. A meeting between 2 of the most damaged souls that Harmony Hills Farm had ever sheltered. Dr. Martinez had arrived early that morning, bringing with him a portable veterinary kit and a tranquilizer gun just in case. Tom Morrison positioned himself near the gate controls, ready to activate emergency lockdown procedures if needed. 3 neighbors who had heard about the unprecedented meeting watched nervously from a safe distance, their phones ready to call 911. But it was Thunderbolt's behavior that morning that truly unsettled everyone present. For the first time in 6 months, the massive bull wasn't pacing his enclosure like a caged demon. Instead, he stood perfectly still in the center of his pen, his enormous head raised and turned toward the approaching group, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. "I've never seen him like this," Dr. Martinez whispered to Tom, his voice tight with concern. "He's too calm. With bulls this traumatized, sudden behavioral changes can signal an impending explosive episode." Emma seemed oblivious to the tension radiating from every adult present. She walked with the steady confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going, her small hand lightly gripping Sarah's arm for guidance, but her head turned unerringly toward Thunderbolt's distant form. "He knows I'm coming," Emma said simply. "He's been getting ready." They stopped at the outer safety barrier, still 15 feet from the inner fence that contained Thunderbolt. Sarah positioned herself between Emma and the bull, every muscle in her body coiled and ready to grab the child and run if necessary. But what happened next defied every prediction, every safety protocol, and every expert opinion they had received. Thunderbolt began to walk slowly toward the fence where they stood, not charging, not aggressive, but moving with a deliberate purpose that seemed almost ritualistic. His massive hooves left deep impressions in the soft earth as he approached, each step measured and careful, as if he understood the delicate nature of this encounter. "This is impossible," Dr. Martinez breathed, his hand instinctively moving toward the tranquilizer gun. Aggressive bulls don't approach humans voluntarily. They either charge or retreat. This behavior doesn't exist in the literature. But Emma wasn't surprised by Thunderbolt's approach. If anything, she seemed to have expected it. She took a small step forward, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped as the little girl moved closer to the most dangerous animal on their property. "Emma, please stay back," Sarah pleaded, but her voice was barely a whisper. Something about the quality of this moment, the strange peace that had settled over the scene, made loud noises feel like sacrilege. Thunderbolt reached the inner fence and stopped, his massive head just 3 feet from where Emma stood behind the safety barrier. For several heartbeats, child and bull regarded each other across the space that separated them, one unable to see, the other unwilling to trust. Then Emma did something that made every adult present forget how to breathe. She reached through the outer safety barrier, extending her small hand toward the massive creature that could kill her with a single movement. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but we don't have to be scared together." Thunderbolt stared at the tiny hand reaching toward him across the barriers. For months, human hands had meant only pain, restraint, and terror. But this hand was different, small, trembling slightly with nervousness, but offering something he had forgotten existed in the world. Slowly, carefully, Thunderbolt lowered his massive head until his scarred muzzle was just inches from Emma's outstretched fingers. The barriers still separated them, but the space between human and animal suddenly felt as thin as tissue paper. "That's it," Emma murmured, her voice taking on the gentle cadence of someone comforting a frightened child. "You remember kindness, don't you? It's buried deep, but it's still there. Doctor, deep." Oh. Martinez later described what happened next as medically impossible. Thunderbolt's entire physiology changed in real time. His stress indicators, muscle tension, breathing patterns, even his posture, showed complete relaxation. The aggressive bull who had terrorized their community for months was displaying submission behaviors typically seen only in completely domesticated animals. But the most extraordinary transformation was happening in Emma. The withdrawn, silent child who had barely spoken in weeks was suddenly animated, confident, speaking in complete sentences as she continued her one-sided conversation with the massive bull. "I lost my family too," Emma told Thunderbolt, her unseeing eyes somehow finding his dark gaze. "People hurt you so much that you forgot how to trust anyone. But Sarah and Tom are different. They saved you just like they saved me." Thunderbolt made a sound that no one at Harmony Hills Farm had ever heard from him before. Not the terrifying bellows of rage that had echoed across the property for months, but a soft, rumbling vocalization that sounded almost like contentment. "He's trying to talk to me," Emma said with wonder in her voice. "He wants to tell me about the bad things, but he doesn't know how to use words." The parallel communication continuing between Emma and Thunderbolt was unlike anything the assembled adults had ever witnessed. The child was responding to behavioral cues that trained professionals had missed, while the bull was displaying emotional intelligence that challenged everything science understood about bovine psychology. For 20 minutes, this impossible conversation continued. Emma spoke softly about her own trauma, her fears, her slow journey toward healing. Thunderbolt listened with an intensity that bordered on reverence, occasionally responding with those gentle, rumbling sounds that seemed to indicate understanding. But the most remarkable moment was yet to come. As storm clouds overhead finally opened and the first drops of rain began to fall, Thunderbolt did something that shattered every remaining doubt about the connection forming between these two wounded souls. The massive bull stepped backward from the fence, lowered himself to the ground in his enclosure and lay down, something he hadn't done in the presence of humans since his arrival at the farm 6 months earlier. It was a gesture of complete trust, total vulnerability, the ultimate sign that he no longer perceived the humans nearby as threats. Emma somehow sensed his movement despite her blindness. "Thank you for trusting me," she whispered through the rain that was now falling steadily. "Tomorrow I'll come back, and we can be not scared together again." As Sarah led Emma back toward the farmhouse through the gentle rain, every adult present knew they had witnessed something that would change their understanding of healing, hope, and the mysterious connections that could form between damaged souls. But none of them could have predicted that Emma's next request would push the boundaries of possibility even further, and lead to a moment so extraordinary that witnesses would struggle for words to describe it. What do you think Emma will ask to do next? Have you ever seen animals respond to children in ways they won't respond to adults? What's the most incredible human-animal connection you've witnessed? Share your thoughts, because what happens in our final chapter will challenge everything you believe about the power of innocent love to heal even the deepest wounds. 3 weeks had passed since Emma's first meeting with Thunderbolt, and their daily visits had become the highlight of both their healing journeys. Every morning, Emma would make her way to the safety barriers where Thunderbolt waited, and they would spend hours in gentle communion that continued to astound everyone who witnessed it. The bull's transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. His aggressive episodes had virtually disappeared, his stress indicators had normalized, and he'd begun eating regularly for the first time since his rescue. But perhaps most remarkably, Thunderbolt had started responding to Emma's voice from hundreds of yards away, turning toward the sound whenever she called his name. Emma's own healing had been equally extraordinary. The withdrawn, silent child who'd arrived at Harmony Hills Farm had blossomed into a confident, joyful little girl who spoke freely about her feelings, laughed at Tom's corny jokes, and had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could trust the world again. But on this particular morning in late October, with autumn painting the Kentucky hills in shades of gold and crimson, Emma was about to make a request that would test every boundary of possibility and push the limits of what anyone believed was safe or sane. "I want to hug him," Emma announced during breakfast, her words cutting through the peaceful morning conversation like a thunderclap. Sarah Morrison nearly dropped her coffee mug. Tom choked on his scrambled eggs. Even the normally unflappable Dr. Martinez, who had started joining them for their morning observations, went pale. "Sweetie," Sarah said carefully, "you know that's not possible. Thunderbolt is much better, but he's still a very large, very powerful animal. Even with all the progress he's made, getting that close would be incredibly dangerous." Emma's expression took on the stubborn determination that Sarah had learned meant the little girl wasn't going to be easily dissuaded. "He wants me to hug him," Emma insisted. "He's been asking me for days. He needs to know that someone can touch him without hurting him." The psychological insight behind Emma's words was staggering. Thunderbolt's trauma from his fighting days had indeed centered around human contact. Every touch he'd experienced had been associated with pain, restraint, or violence. The idea that he might crave gentle human contact as part of his healing process was theoretically sound, but practically terrifying. Dr. Martinez shook his head firmly. "Emma, I understand you feel connected to Thunderbolt, but we're talking about a 2,400-pound animal with a documented history of violence. One startled movement, one moment of instinctive reaction, and he could accidentally kill you without even meaning to." But Emma's quiet confidence never wavered. "He won't hurt me," she said with the simple faith that only children possess. "He knows I'm broken like him. He knows I trust him completely." If this incredible story of healing and trust is moving you as much as it's moving us, please smash that like button and hit that subscribe button right now. We share amazing stories of hope and miracles every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next, because what Emma is about to do will challenge every expert opinion and defy every law of animal behavior. For 5 days, the Morrison family debated Emma's request. They consulted with animal behaviorists, spoke with Emma's social worker, and even contacted specialists at the University of Kentucky's Veterinary College. Every single expert they spoke with advised against any direct physical contact between Emma and Thunderbolt. "That animal may seem calm now, but instincts can override conditioning in milliseconds," warned Dr. Patricia Lewis, the state's leading expert on large animal psychology. "Even domesticated bulls can be unpredictable. With Thunderbolt's trauma history, allowing physical contact would be criminally negligent." But Emma's persistence, combined with her increasingly sophisticated understanding of Thunderbolt's emotional needs, gradually wore down their resistance. More importantly, Thunderbolt himself seemed to be requesting the same thing Emma was asking for. During their daily visits, the massive bull had begun pressing himself against the inner fence, stretching his neck through the rails as far as possible, clearly trying to make physical contact with Emma's outstretched hand. His vocalizations had become more plaintive, almost pleading, as if he was asking for something that the barriers between them couldn't provide. "They're both asking for the same thing," Tom observed during one of their evening discussions. "Maybe we need to trust that they understand each other better than we understand either of them." The plan they eventually developed was the most elaborate safety protocol in Harmony Hills Farm's history. They would create a controlled environment within Thunderbolt's enclosure, A small pen within the pen, surrounded by portable fencing that could be quickly removed if emergency evacuation became necessary. Dr. Martinez would be present with tranquilizer equipment. The local volunteer fire department would be on standby just outside the property. Tom would position himself with emergency phone contacts, and Sarah would be inside the enclosure with Emma, ready to intervene instantly if Thunderbolt showed any signs of aggression. But most importantly, they would let Emma and Thunderbolt dictate the pace of the interaction. If either showed signs of stress or discomfort, they would stop immediately. The morning of the planned embrace arrived clear and crisp, with the kind of brilliant autumn sunshine that makes everything look touched by magic. Emma had been unusually quiet during breakfast, as if she was preparing herself spiritually for something momentous. "Are you absolutely sure about this, sweetheart?" Sarah asked one final time as they approached Thunderbolt's enclosure. Emma nodded with a serenity that seemed far beyond her 8 years. "He's been waiting his whole life for someone to hug him without hurting him," she said simply. "And I've been waiting for someone who understands what it's like to be broken." Thunderbolt was already waiting at the fence when they arrived, but his demeanor was unlike anything anyone had seen before. The massive bull stood perfectly still, his enormous head lowered submissively, his entire body language radiating a peace so profound it seemed to emanate from his very soul. "Doctor." Martinez checked his equipment one final time. Tom positioned himself at the emergency controls. Sarah took a deep breath and opened the gate to Thunderbolt's enclosure for the first time since his arrival 6 months earlier. Emma stepped inside with the confident stride of someone walking into her own home. Thunderbolt remained motionless, watching her approach with eyes that no longer held rage or fear, but something that looked remarkably like love. "Hello, my friend," Emma whispered as she walked slowly across the enclosure toward the massive bull. "Are you ready for the best hug in the world?" What happened next will be remembered as one of the most extraordinary moments of human-animal connection ever documented. Emma approached Thunderbolt without hesitation, her small arms spreading wide as she drew near his massive form. And Thunderbolt, this creature who had been conditioned to associate human contact with pain, slowly lowered his enormous head and allowed a blind 8-year-old girl to wrap her arms around his scarred neck. The embrace lasted only seconds, but its impact was eternal. In that moment, years of trauma began to heal for both of them. Thunderbolt's entire body relaxed into Emma's gentle touch, while Emma finally found the unconditional acceptance she had been searching for since her parents' death. "I love you too," Emma whispered into Thunderbolt's ear, and the massive bull made a sound of pure contentment that echoed across the hills like a song of hope. When they finally separated, both Emma and Thunderbolt were transformed. The angry, dangerous bull had become a gentle giant who would spend the rest of his days protecting the little girl who had shown him that not all humans brought pain. And Emma had found her purpose, caring for a creature who needed her as much as she needed him. 6 months later, Emma and Thunderbolt are inseparable. She reads to him every afternoon. He keeps her safe during her daily walks around the farm. Their bond has inspired dozens of research studies and changed how scientists understand the healing power of interspecies connections. But for Sarah and Tom Morrison, the real miracle isn't scientific. It's personal. They've watched two of the most broken souls they'd ever encountered heal each other through nothing more powerful than unconditional love and absolute trust. What moves you most about Emma and Thunderbolt's incredible story? The courage it took for Emma to trust completely? The transformation in Thunderbolt from rage to love? Or the proof that healing is possible no matter how deep the wounds? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because stories like this remind us that love truly can conquer anything. And sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply believing that broken things can be made whole again.